I remained, however, the night at Mons. Next day, I could not go any farther than Namur. I traveled under the name of Colonel Losack, sent by the Duke of Wellington on a mission to Munich and Vienna. I had purchased at Mons a bad cabriolet. I had no servant, and the weather was so severe, my health so feeble, that I could not travel above 20 leagues a day. It was very dangerous for me to remain so long on the road. The description of my person had been sent everywhere about. I might meet with Englishmen, and my passport, greatcoat, and buttons with the arms of England would all betray me, as I could not speak the language. I arrived, however, without any accident at Worms. I knew enough German to serve my purpose, and I hastened to read the papers. How great was my consternation when I read in the Gazette that Madame de Lavalette remained in the conciergerie, and that Sir Robert Wilson and his 2 friends had been apprehended. The general had brought with us to Mons a young servant who could not speak French. When he returned, the spies who were on the lookout for me observed in the yard of the hotel where he lived his coach covered with mud. They inquired of the portress, who told them that the general was just come home from a journey on which he had been absent only 3 days. The police suspected him. The young servant was seduced by one of the spies, who questioned him artfully, and he confessed that his master had been to Mons with an officer of the guards who could not speak a word of English. The description of my person given by the young man put the police on the track, but proofs were necessary. It was this servant who used to carry the correspondence of Sir Robert Wilson to the English embassy. They promised him money if he would bring his dispatches to the prefect of police. He did not fail to do so. The first letter they opened was directed to the Earl Grey. The history of our journey was related in it with all its details. Having gained possession of this document, the police had the 3 Englishmen apprehended. The perusal of the journals grieved me beyond expression. I took a resolution to go to Russia to solicit from the Emperor Alexander that my wife and friends might be set at liberty, and I flew to Mannheim to get a letter from the Grand Duchess of Baden, Stephanie, first cousin to my wife. She was out of town, and from what I learned from my landlord, I should be forced to keep up the most severe incognito. The Grand Duke refused the passage through his territories to the outlaws who came from France. Not so much, however, out of ill will toward them, as for fear of compromising himself with the French government. When I left Mannheim, I wrote, nevertheless, to the Grand Duchess, Stephanie, and continued my journey like a madman through Württemberg, where I was nearly arrested at Stuttgart. The king, who at that time occupied the throne, would not have failed to make me acquainted with his dungeons. I succeeded at last in passing through Ulm and found myself in safety in the Bavarian territory. When the king of Bavaria heard of my escape from the conciergerie, he said to Prince Eugène, "As for him, he may come to me. I will take care of him." I went in consequence to Munich and wrote a note to Baron Darnay, secretary to the prince, to beg he would come to see me. He came, but after having delivered my note to the prince, who dined that day with the king, the news was communicated to his majesty after dinner. They reckoned no longer upon me, thinking me gone to America. My arrival surprised the king, who did not wish to have disagreeable discussions with France. After a moment's reflection, he said, "He cannot remain here, not even under a feigned name. That ferret, the Duke d'Alberg, is at Munich and would soon find him out. Remain 2 days with him and let him set off the 3rd for Freysingen. He will be in safety there. That small town is surrounded with woods. The cold was severe, but I felt so happy at being at liberty that I could not bear to remain in my room and went out 10 times a day to stroll about the forest, notwithstanding the snow and ice. My strange manners surprised the inhabitants, and a French emigrant who lived at Munich came to my abodes, and he soon discovered who I was and carried the news to the capital. I was in consequence obliged to leave my retreat, and the king was kind enough to send me to Starnberg, a wretched village situated near the lake of that name. I was comfortable there, But spring was approaching. The forests in that part of the country are beautiful and of immense extent, while the banks of the lake are lined with delightful country seats. Prince Eugène used to come twice a week to the house of a gamekeeper 2 leagues from Munich, where I went to meet him. He brought me newspapers and books and acquainted me with all that was going forward. I thus reached the month of May, but I was again obliged to leave Sternberg. I had been recognized, and the Prince Royal, who learned that I resided in that remote corner of the country, remonstrated with his father on my stay in Bavaria, and the difficulties into which he might get involved with France, in case they should learn in Paris that he had given me a retreat. The king denied my being in his states, but at the same time, he sent me an order to retire to the farther end of the lake. By the advice of Prince Eugène, I went and concealed myself in the house of a gardener, 4 leagues farther still. You will be more comfortable there, said the prince. In about a fortnight, I shall come to reside in the royal seat that is no more than a league from your new abode. We shall be able to see each other every day. He soon came there with his family, and I used to go every morning to the castle and did not go home till the evening. The friendly reception I met with from Princess Augusta and the kind attentions bestowed on me by all the persons that surrounded her contributed greatly to alleviate my grief and restore my health. The prince said to me one day, "The king is accustomed annually to spend 1 day in this place. When I went yesterday to take his orders on the subject, he accepted my invitation, but on condition that you would come and dine with him. I went. His Majesty received me with open arms. He was accompanied by some officers of his household, and among them others by Count Charles von Reichberg, who told us that he had left Paris 8 days after my escape from prison. Though the gendarmes had been present at his departure and had examined his passport with a great deal of care, he was nevertheless stopped on the boulevard and obliged, as well as his 2 traveling companions, to get out of their carriage, that the descriptions of their persons might be verified, and that it might be ascertained that I was not among them. The king was very merry and took a great deal of pleasure at seeing me where I was, after having been exposed to so many dangers. During the 5 hours that he remained with the prince, he never ceased loading me with the most delicate attentions. The pains he perpetually took to bring to my mind his former stay in Paris, when I had the honor of paying my court to him, the slight service I had rendered to him in my quality of postmaster general, and the attachment with which the emperor had honored me were meant to show the persons who surrounded him that I was under his especial protection, and that my misfortunes augmented the interest he vouchsafed to express for me. When he was ready to go, he came up to me, and pressing my hand said, "Remain at peace in my country, live among your friends, and reckon upon my attachment and protection." I soon obtained permission to settle in Munich under a feigned name. I went every night to the theater, and when the play was over, I finished the evening with the prince, who lived en famille. But it was quickly known in Paris. The Duc de Richelieu took it amiss, and a formal demand was transmitted to Munich to send me away from Bavaria. Count d'Erlon, who lived in the outskirts of the city, was comprehended in the sentence of proscription, though he did not live there under his own name. The cabinet of Munich replied to that of Paris that they knew nobody in Bavaria who bore our names. But at the same time, the king proposed to us to take refuge in Silesia, where he possessed several castles as Duc de Deux-Ponts. The measure was a dangerous one. Could the King of Bavaria's protection follow and defend me at so great a distance and in the heart of a Prussian province? Should I not be obliged to go from thence to Russia, whither I felt they wanted to drive me? I answered by begging he would rather shut me up in some prison in Bavaria. Fortunately, the diplomatic correspondence relaxed by degrees on that subject. Count d'Erlon remained at his country seat, and I escaped by going to Eichstatt in the Principality of Prince Eugene, and afterwards to Augsburg, to his sister, the Duchess of St. Louis, Hortense. I passed with her the last year of my banishment. The attentions and kindness she showed me might have made me perhaps forget France if my dearest affections had not made life intolerable far from my country. Madame de Lavalette had got out of prison after 6 weeks' ill usage. Deep melancholy and perpetual alarm inspired her with a great disgust for society and threw her mind into such a state that she was said to suffer from mental derangement. Though my daughter was at that time no more than 15 years old, her mother hastened to establish her that she might enjoy the protection of a husband when the state of her own health would not permit her to keep a watchful eye over her. She wrote to me, "I feel it is high time to shelter my daughter from our misfortunes." She fixed her choice on Monsieur de Forget, the son of a gentleman of Auvergne, whose name has long been respected. He had been auditor to the Council of State. I had observed in him a great deal of talent and an excellent heart. I gave my consent, and my daughter is now happy and honored in her province. Finally, after 6 years of outlawry, the gates of France were again open to me. Before my departure, I obtained an audience of the King of Bavaria. He pressed me in his arms with emotion and said, "I embrace Monsieur Cossard." That was the name under which I went in Germany. "But I require of Monsieur de Lavalette to come and thank me within 2 years. I am growing old. He must not tarry too long." My political situation in France was very uncomfortable, and the severity of the government too great to have permitted me to fulfill the engagement the king had made me to take, and which was so consonant to the wishes of my grateful heart. Death has since snatched him from his subjects, who adored him, and will never forget him who they were wont to call the good king. I left Prince Eugene in the prime of his life, enjoying excellent health, and in the most happy situation, beloved by the king as if he had been his son, surrounded by numerous and charming family, loaded with all of the gifts of fortune, of whom he had nothing more to demand, his name shining with bright and unsullied glory. He had a fall from a sledge in 1816, in consequence of which a gathering took place, they say, in his head. The pain being very slight, he neglected the necessary remedies. 7 or 8 weeks afterwards, the gathering appeared with symptoms which the physicians did not comprehend, and he died at the age of 44, leaving a disconsolate widow and children whose education was not yet finished, but also a reputation for courage, wisdom, and generosity that neither France, Italy, nor Bavaria will ever forget. When I came back to France, I was obliged to have my letters of pardon registered. This ceremony, which might have become painful to my feelings, was managed by the magistrates at Colmar, with a discretion for which I will always be thankful. The Advocate General, Monsieur Rosec, only said he had been sentenced for conduct which, from day to day, appears less serious. I came to Paris, where I fixed my abode and lived in retirement, forgotten by most of my former friends and also by the police, who might have made my life very comfortable. At last, the health of Madame de Lavalette recovered sufficiently to permit me to take her home. A deep melancholy throws her frequently into fits of abstractedness, but she's always equally mild, amiable, and good. We pass the summer in a retired country house where she seems to enjoy herself. I have preserved my independence, the first of all mortal riches, without pension, salary, or gratuity of any sort, after a long life, consecrated to the service of my country, offering up to her liberty prayers that will perhaps never be fulfilled, and living with the recollections of a great period and a great man.